The Soul Redeemer, Chapter 7, Part B. It was time for the wedding ceremony to begin. No amount of words could describe the terror of the next hours as sexual appetites consumed the people and sacrifices were made. Through torture and unholy sex, soul ties were created, invisibly linking people together, allowing unclean spirits or demons to gain power and to transfer between people, and they were purposely being assigned to Nicole. Blood sacrifices, especially human, call forth the most powerful of demons, principalities, and powers. When Nikki saw Carrie enter the room, she wasn't sure if she was relieved to have someone who might be a friend, or sad for the little girl who was also stuck in this terrible nightmare. She looked to be about Nikki's age, and even though they had not known one another before that very moment, an instant connection was made between the two little girls, the kind that happens when two people share an experience of the most desperate kind, each knowing that the other understands like no one else ever could. Nikki felt Carrie's hand clasp hers, and they stood together as a man looked at them and slowly declared words that became branded on Nikki's soul. One must die so one can live. Carrie, you are the chosen one. And they picked her up and laid her on the table that was still placed in the center of the circle and the star. After strapping her down, they stationed Nicole near Carrie's face, and Carrie turned and looked deeply into Nikki's eyes. Nikki watched in amazement as somehow the initial look of fear on Carrie's face dissipated, and love began to radiate from her eyes into Nikki's. What Nikki did not know was that it was the love in her own eyes that had been transferred to Carrie and had dispelled the fear, then was being transferred back to her. They did not understand at that time that God's original plan and intention had been to create people with the ability to form soul ties so that His Spirit could be passed between people. It was Satan's perversion and defilement of this gift that was being practiced within the occult. This time the doctor raised the knife and was holding it high above Carrie's neck when Carrie was redeemed. Nikki didn't know that was the word for it, but that was what she witnessed. Carrie's attention suddenly switched from Nikki to something else above her. Nikki turned her head to see what Carrie was looking at, and it seemed as if time froze as she watched beautiful white angels swoop down into the room and lift Carrie's spirit from her body. For a moment it was like she was seeing two Carries. One was still lying on the table looking up, and the other Carrie was sitting up as two angels, one on each side of her, began lifting her out of her body. At first, Carrie looked surprised. Then Nikki saw her smile in joy and delight and then disappear along with the beautiful shining ones. The demons were used to such intervention. They had come to terms with their inability to stop such thievery and had become content with taking the life from the body even though they failed to secure the spirit and the soul of their sacrifice. At that very moment, time returned to normal, and the blade above Carrie's neck came down hard, separating her head from her body. Nikki closed her eyes as blood sprayed over her face and body. She couldn't run from it, for she was being held in place. The chanting that had been going on in the background grew loud, and they began to chant in English so she could understand their words and remember their words. "Red, red, Carrie's dead, yonder rolls her severed head." As the life blood left Carrie's body, Nicole was aware of many dark angels moving from the people in the room to Carrie's body, through Carrie's blood, and then moving towards her. They were so terrible to look at that she closed her eyes. She wasn't aware that they had been unable to penetrate her body, soul, or spirit as planned, for as they approached her, They saw that she was already dripping with another's blood, covered completely, shielded by righteousness, and sealed with the Holy Spirit. They didn't dare touch her, and they began to frantically fly around the room, screaming in frustrated pain as their heightened lustful desires of new prey went unfulfilled. Apparently, however, no one else saw or noticed the tormented evil spirits. The doctor was continuing his training speech. One must die so one can live. Carrie died so that you can live, Nicole. You are to live for a purpose, to serve your Lord and Master, Satan. The chanting in the room grew louder, and what seemed like chaos broke out in the room. The people began to jump around and dance in a frenzy as the frustrated demons returned to occupy their previous carriers, trying to satisfy some of their bloodlust and insatiable desires. Having been summoned, new dark angels were also arriving, joining in all the pandemonium. Two entities wearing purple capes with hoods that covered their heads entered the room. Nicole thought one was a man, but the other must be a giant, for his head almost touched the ceiling. Immediately the room grew quiet, and everyone dropped to their knees with their heads bowed low. After a moment, the smaller of the two said, "Well done." The people replied, "Welcome, Grand Master. We are here to do your will." Marcus had been in attendance earlier in the ritual to make sure that things were done according to his specifications, for this case was far too important to leave it up to anyone else, and there was too much at stake for him personally as well. His entrance at this point was the grand entrance of the most important part of the ritual, for he was ushering in Lord I.S. himself, and some semblance of pomp and circumstance was required. After the greeting, Marcus commanded preparation for the great event to continue. They all rose up and reverently began to move about. Nicole was afraid of the giant, but no one else seemed to notice his presence, and this gave her some comfort. They dressed her in a small white bridal gown. The others donned black capes with hoods that were lined in red, and the look Nicole saw in their eyes as they watched her made her tremble. She began to feel like a fly caught in a spider's web, for they had the look of a predator waiting in anticipation for his meal to be delivered to him. After looking intently around the room and then observing Nicole for several moments, the giant approached the man and whispered something into his ear. The man in the purple cape slowly approached Nikki. He picked her up by the arms and looked into her eyes. She steadily looked back into his. Then, in a rage, he screamed, "No! It can't be!" And he nearly dropped her. He began to pace back and forth, talking to himself or to an unseen force, and then he stopped and said, "Call her. We can't proceed until we have legal rights. This one has been redeemed by another's blood, and her spirit belongs to him, sealed tight." As he said this, he spat on the ground. Then he turned to the doctor and said, "Well, don't just stand there wasting time. Go do something with this mess. This thing has just become a whole lot more complicated." Nicole was taken into another room. The music had stopped. The wedding dress was removed. She was dressed in boy's clothes, placed on a stool, and given a baseball cap and glove. The doctor began programming her mind. Her spirit may have been sealed, but her soul, her mind, will, and emotions were still open to manipulation and control. By the time Nicole stepped down from the stool, a part of her mind now believed that she was a little boy named Willie. His job was to watch for opportune moments to try to get Nicole to kill herself, and two dark angels had been assigned to help him, suicide and death. Back in the big room, they began to work on breaking Nicole's will down. She was stripped of all clothing and forced into a large black bag which they zipped up tight. Nicole hated darkness, as did Nikki. To be locked inside a dark place like that was horrible. But the dead, cold, stinky body also occupying the space beside her sent her into a deeper level of dissociation. She was utterly helpless and was in a state of hopelessness too deep for tears. Time stopped for Nikki. She had no idea how long she lay perfectly still in that body bag. But when they opened the bag and brought her out, their purpose for her was accomplished. Her will had been broken and was now bendable to theirs, and a part of her mind had been split off and was now programmable. It was all part of a greater plan in which they would be able to use her specific giftings for their nefarious purposes later in time, all without her knowledge. The white gown was once again placed on her, and she was put inside the circle on the bottom point of the inverted pentagram or star. The man in the purple cape was standing on the outside line of the circle to the side of Nicole, and everyone else was standing around the outside of them. The room had grown quiet except for the music that was playing once again. The man said, "Bring her." The air inside the room took on an electrifying quality as the newcomer stepped forward. All eyes watched her approach, and a few stepped aside to let her pass. Someone grabbed her and stopped her progress while murmuring broke out. The man demanded silence. He was quiet a moment and then said, "In spite of the other presence we are encountering, we will proceed. This is our territory and he will not interfere." The woman was pushed forward until she was standing on the edge of the circle. Nikki looked past the hood and gazed into a familiar face. Hope welled up within her. She would have run to her mother, but was being held back. "Mommy!" she called out as she reached for her. In controlled rage, the man addressed the woman. "What have you done? Last week she was ours, and now we are all compromised because you allowed her spirit to be turned?" Nikki looked at the woman who was her mother, but at this moment she looked like someone else. She watched as her mother fell to her knees and bowed her head in respect and shame, and said that she hadn't known about the turning of Nicole's spirit and was very sorry. The man answered, "There's nothing to be done about it now, so we'll proceed. However, this negligence will not go unpunished. And as Nicole grows up, you will have much to do to prove your allegiance to us. There will be markers set in place that you will be held responsible for. Are you willing to continue with this assignment?" Mother answered, "Yes," as she was yanked to her feet. And then the man's stance became rigid, and in a powerful voice he asked, "As Nicole's spiritual covering and authority, who gives this girl in unholy matrimony to Satan?" In answer to the question, Nicole's mother said, "I do." Nicole's soul cried out, "No, Mama! No, Mama, no!" But her body remained silent and still as the pain of betrayal, rejection, abandonment, and complete despair overwhelmed the already broken little girl. In response to this enormous burden, she collapsed onto the floor and curled up into as tight a ball as possible, then did the only thing she knew to do. She buried the pain of it all so deep down inside that it would likely never be able to be retrieved. The woman was told to seal her vow, and so she removed the white wedding dress from Nicole's body, and while Nikki lay naked and vulnerable on the floor, the mother covered her daughter with a robe that was red and cold, still damp with Carrie's blood. She said, "Under the covering of the blood I seal my vow. Flesh of my flesh, and bone of my bone is given in unholy matrimony to Lucifer, the true God of life and death, our Lord Satan." Nikki became aware that the chanting in unholy tongues had resumed. She was made to stand up again, still covered by the bloody robe. Nicole's mother was led out of the room. As the man in the purple robe moved forward and stood just inside the line of the circle in anticipation, Nikki heard her mother scream in pain. She would have bolted at that moment if the robed man had not stopped her, for she somehow understood that no matter what her mother had done to her, she was as much a victim as herself. And she vowed that from then on she would do everything she could to protect her mother. When she realized that she could not escape, Nikki looked up at the man. His eyes were closed, but his hands were raised, like he was waiting for someone to put something in his arms. As the chanting grew louder and the people were growing restless and dancing about, they began removing their clothes, and Nikki closed her eyes against the horrible deeds going on in front of her. When the ground under her began to shake, Nikki opened her eyes and jumped to the side of the circle next to the man. She watched in terror as the floor in the middle of the star and circle opened, and the most hideous, evil spirits began rising out of the pit. The giant moved into the circle and removed his cape. As it fell to the floor, he began to transform from a beautiful-looking man into a terrifying monster with large wings. Nicole wanted to run and struggled against the restraining hand. The spirits that had come out of the pit began swirling around the creature, and one by one they entered his body through every opening they could find. The creature seemed to grow as he feasted on those entering his body. As he turned and looked into Nicole's eyes, the robe was removed from her, and his snake-like tongue emerged and exerted itself far enough to encircle her body, hungrily tasting every part of it. When the last demon had merged with its host, the man in the purple cape stepped into the center of the circle where a moment ago there had been a hole, a portal from the depths of hell to the earth, and bowed low before the creature. He said, "I welcome you, my lord Is. I am yours to do with as you see fit." At this declaration a mighty hissing sound came from the creature as it slithered up into the man. The purple robe was then removed from the man, who no longer looked exactly like a man. He took Nicole's hand and led her into the center of the circle as well, then laid her down on the cold floor. As his naked body came close and hovered over Nikki, for a split second she recognized her Uncle Marcus, and in the next second Marcus was gone, and the most vile, evil, grotesque, dark angel covered Nicole's body with his own. In a low, seducing tone it hissingly proclaimed, "In the name of our Lord and Master Satan, I, Lord Incubus Succubus, take and do wed Nicole in unholy matrimony, to be joined together with her until death." Nikki saw what appeared to be part man and part woman on the same contorted face of the creature. Just before she felt that she was being crushed to death, sexual desires apart from Nikki's control were being stimulated and manipulated within her. She knew it was bad and tried to resist, but was unable to defend herself against this torment. She must have fainted, for after a brief moment of sexual pleasure mixed with terror and then physical torture and searing pain as the monster penetrated her body with his own, she was not aware of anything else until she woke up, clothed in her own dress, lying on a bed in a quiet room. The doctor smiled at her and came and sat down on the bed next to her. Nikki was glad for any measure of comfort and welcomed his friendly embrace. He picked her up and sat her on his lap. He told her that she didn't need to be afraid, but that there was something he needed to do that might hurt just a little bit. He sat her back on the stool where Willie had been created and explained that she would not remember anything about that day, the people, or what had happened there, but he was going to give her a mark that would last forever, claiming the vows that had been made. The doctor took her left hand and held her ring finger apart from the others. Then with a large knife he quickly ran the sharp blade over the soft skin on the inside of it twice. He said, "This shows that you have been wed to Satan. But, Nicole, you must not speak of this to anyone." If your parents ask you what happened to your finger, you must not tell them the truth." He put a band-aid on the bleeding wound and kissed it, then worked for a while more, splitting off several other parts of Nicole's mind and assigning demons to those parts as protection from her memories for the sake of the coven, Marcus, and her mother. She would be completely unaware that her mind had been programmed to activate those parts of herself if she ever got close to remembering anything about the ritual, nor would she be aware of the demons that had been layered into those parts, who would do their best to help each part fulfill its job or purpose. When the doctor was confident that memories had been properly dealt with, Carol put Nicole in the car and drove her home. Nicole didn't remember anything about the day, but there was a very odd smell that was stuck in her nose. She didn't know what it was, but she didn't like it. She was also concerned about the band-aid on her finger because she couldn't remember what happened to it. Carol told her that she had gotten it stuck in the car door. She also told Nicole that when her parents asked what they had done that day, she should tell them they had been window shopping. Nicole's little mind was working hard, trying to remember about the smell, about the finger. She felt like they were right there on the tip of her thoughts, but she just couldn't quite reach them. Nicole was so tired that when she got home she voluntarily took a nap. Mother woke her up some time later. "Come on, Nicole, sweetie, wake up. We're going to Peggy's house for dinner." Nicole loved Peggy. She was a teenager and was very intriguing to the little girl. But there was something bothering Nicole. As she woke up, the smell was still stuck in her nose. "Mommy, what's that smell?" she asked. "I don't smell anything, dear," Mother said. "What does it smell like?" "I don't know. It's just a bad smell," Nicole answered. It was such a strong, overwhelming odor, and it followed Nicole through the whole car ride to Peggy's and was the one disappointment of the evening. Peggy didn't smell it either. She knew this because she asked Peggy if she smelled it, and she said no. There was another thing that disturbed her about the smell. It was the feeling that she should know what that smell was, but every time she thought she was beginning to remember something that would help her to identify it, the thought would be gone like a vapor in the wind while the smell remained. I.S. was laughing. Of all the things that had happened that day, Nicole's body was remembering the smell of burning flesh. Well, good. Let that beautiful stench torment her. He loved torment. He was fairly certain that the memories were buried deep enough that the body memory would not trigger any other memories, and he believed that it would dissipate soon. In fact, he decided that every once in a while he would use the smell in years to come as a little token of torturing remembrance. But Jesus had not forgotten his own precious jewel. He would come to Nicole at night in dreams. Sometimes he would hold her, and sometimes he pushed her back and forth on a swing. He would pour his love into her while she slept, and in the morning her spirit would be refreshed. Nicole knew that Jesus was real and that he loved her. She loved him in return, and no one would ever guess the secrets that were buried behind her bright smile.